Right, I just had a really strange thing. I was just reading a book and the screen went black, and I tried to refresh it. Uh, it looked like the battery had run out. I carried on the video for a bit, and then thought, no, the battery's gone. And but when I've just looked back on where it ended, it was when I started to talk about Barking Abbey. So very peculiar, very peculiar. Um, yeah, what's meant to be will be. So we're going to carry on. Right. A Pilgrimage for Brianhaw, A Spiritual Journey of Relevance, From the Ruins of Barking Abbey to Canterbury Cathedral by Lee D. Miller. That's me. And so we're in the Charlton Arms. Just spoke to David, the landlord, and the young fella in the bar about the book I was reading, which was The Sun and the Serpent by Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller. And just gone through about the Merry Michael line and how it aligns on the top of Glastonbury Tor. Alright, so that's where we're at. Just got into Barking Abbey and it cut out, so here we go again. Right, take two, at least for that bit. At least for this bit, whatever. Right, it's right. I'm gonna read that whole part, that whole paragraph again, alright? A couple then came to the bar and the barman went to serve them. It naturally brought an end to our conversation, and so I decided to engross myself in my book once more. I took my pint and found a table to sit at. I was actually at the point in the book which preceded the Glastonbury Tor revelation, but because I'd been flicking through it to look at the pictures beforehand, I'd already seen some of the information yet to come. But the part of the book that I was just about to read took my intrigue to a new level as the information appeared to directly associate itself with my pilgrimage, and more specifically to that of the ruins of Barking Abbey. Before that though, I think I need to explain why I was reading the book I had in my possession at this time. Basically it was very simple. I only ever pick up a book to start reading if I feel like it's the right time to do so. I don't think I'm alone in doing that. And the day before I departed on my pilgrimage, I felt like this was the right time to read it. I bought the book 3 years before, in 2008, and had never felt the inclination to pick it up again. And in all those years, it had just remained sitting on my bookshelf. To be even more honest, I'm not actually sure why I originally bought it. I just happened to be passing a bookshop in Glastonbury and saw it in the window. I looked at it and then thought maybe I should buy that before entering the shop to ask the bookseller about it. The lady bookseller informed me that it's very good, and so without further inquiry I just went with the flow and purchased it. I didn't look at it again until a time when I literally didn't look at it again until a time when I sat by the side of a river and was viciously splashed by a number of unruly dogs. The River Devon. Right, I was on page 126 of the book, and it began to speak about the European St Michael line, which crossed Europe all the way from Rhodes before passing through Mont Saint Michel in Brittany, while on its way to its mirror image across the English Channel at St Michael's Mount in Cornwall. At this point, the European St Michael line crossed the English St Michael line, and the book's authors stated that it formed a significant nude point there. They went on to say that it's tempting to consider that the Normans understood this, and that when William the Conqueror invaded England on St Michael's Eve 1066 and gave Cornwall to his half-brother Robert de Morton, who rode into the county flying a banner of St Michael, that they were guided by more than the material considerations of conquest. Asterix, St Michael's Day is on the 29th of September, and so its eve was on the 28th. The tangible link between St Michael's Mount and Mont Saint Michel that resulted from this and the establishment of a Benedictine monastery was to last for centuries. Benedictine, William the Conqueror, Earth energy, Barking Abbey. I thought, forget about words, I was lost for thoughts. And I took a few moments to collect mine. You may remember that before I departed on my pilgrimage, I spoke with Canon Gordon Tarry about the nature of pilgrimage, pilgrimages and the history of Barking Abbey. One of the questions I asked him at the time was about the positioning of the abbey itself. I explained that from my travels around the world, I found that many Christian churches have been built on existing spiritual sites of the indigenous peoples who were colonised, and I inquired if he knew of anything in the church's record that may acknowledge the same about Barking Abbey. I basically wondered if there was any evidence of maybe some kind of druid place of worship occupying the site at Barking and preceding the construction of the abbey in 666 AD. I was told that there was no evidence of which he was aware, and that, as far as he knew, the abbey had been constructed upon its site in Barking for purely strategic reasons, owing to its proximity to the River Roding and consequently its accessibility to the River Thames. I accepted Karen Gordon-Terry's answer, but my intuition had always told me that there was a different kind of feel to the energy in and around the site of Barking Abbey, and so, based purely on that and nothing else, I kept my mind and heart open to the possibility. Well, during that moment, sitting there in the pub and reading that passage from my book, something appeared to click in me. And I began to wonder again if I could be right about my initial presumption. After all, was there any significance in Barking Abbey being the first Benedictine abbey to be built in England? And why did William the Conqueror choose it as his first residence after he had been successful in the quest to conquer England? Maybe it was just for strategic reasons after all, because Barking Abbey was close to the City of London, and surely there are other places better situated. Was a connection because of the Benedictines? But what was significant about the Benedicts anyway? I didn't know, but I found it to be very intriguing. It also made me realise that I still knew very little about what Benedictine actually meant. I only knew that it was a teaching of Christianity, especially by St. Benedict, and established by St. Benedict, and I have to admit that I've always been so very confused about all the different orders of Christianity. As a result, I've never really bothered to investigate them further because it all seemed like such a mess. The difference between Protestants and Catholics was enough to confuse me. From the gist of what I gathered, without any in-depth inquiry, it appeared to me that all versions of Christianity were saying Jesus Christ was the truth and the only way to the truth, yet they appeared to differ slightly in their interpretations of that truth and in the name they gave to their faith. To be fair, I've never known what to make of it all, and so I just didn't bother finding out. A church has always been a church to me, and even at Christmas, when I've attended midnight mass, I've just gone to whichever church was closest to me at the time, and whether that was in my own country or abroad. Anyway, even though I didn't have all the answers, I was quite amazed by the revelations, and it gave me much food for thought. I carried on reading and soon came across another reference to the Benedictines. It was on page 137, and it was in reference to two churches under the Benedictine Priory of Tywardreath in Cornwall. It stated, traditionally the Benedictines had been initiates in the mysteries of earth energies, and like the Knights Templar, who were charged with the protection of the pilgrim routes that were the physical counterparts of the terrestrial channels, always seemed to crop up in exactly the right place. Right, I'm going to read that bit again. Traditionally, the Benedictines had been initiates in the mysteries of Earth's energies, and like the Knights Templar, who were charged with the protection of the pilgrim routes that were the physical counterpart of the terrestrial channels, always seemed to crop up in exactly the right place. What the bloody hell? I thought, hang on, is that the answer to my question? I was spellbound, and I continued to think that if William the Conqueror was aware of the nature of Earth's energy fields as he set upon his conquest of England, wouldn't he be particular about the first place he set up residence in England after his success? And if he was particular about the place in which he first resided, wouldn't he select a place that beheld a particular significance to the Earth's energy field? And if he had selected that first residence based upon its significance, then could that mean that the site of Barking Abbey was indeed significant in a way other than that of being strategic? Of course, I couldn't answer any of that, and I'm not completely convinced myself. I'm simply informing you of the directions of my thoughts in that moment. I didn't know all the answers, I just had lots of questions. My head was now buzzing with consideration, and I didn't feel like I could read anymore. I finished my beer and returned my glass to the bar. I then bidded my farewell to the barman. "Good to meet you, mate," he said as he approached me from the other side of the bar in order to shake my hand. "You too, bud," I replied while shaking his. "And make sure you get to the mump," he then added. "Will do," I said with a smile, and then I loaded my backpack upon my coal sack and departed the chapter arms in. Yeah. And that was why I followed the Merry Michael line as well and did what I did on that journey. And on those 15 nude points, it's 15 years, the anniversary since I did the pilgrimage, starting on May Day 2015. I declared Brian's acceptance speech for the most politically inspiring figure. It's a tapestry life, like the Brian tapestry. All weaves in and works its magic. That's the love. Right, asterisks. I have since discovered that there is indeed significance in the location of Barking Abbey. Very intriguingly, I have found that there is a straight line which is formed by the sites of Barking Abbey, Benedictine, the Tower of London, which actually All Hallows Barking, Suffolk Cathedral and Westminster Abbey, Benedictine. It is called the London Stonehenge line because the alignment leads from London to Stonehenge. How about that? I retraced my steps back into the village. I actually forgot it went through Westminster Abbey. Wow. I retraced my steps back into the village of Chartham Hatch and then out into the countryside once more. I was immediately in campsite search mode and knew that I was now very close to Canterbury. It was a peculiar sensation I was experiencing at this time, and not just because of all the revelations. I found that I was in no rush to get to Canterbury at all, and that I actually didn't want to get there anytime soon. Now, to people, so I forgot that about Westminster Abbey, but that's where Brian was, wasn't he? Why did I forget about that connection? That's mad. So Brian was on that line from Barking Abbey in Parliament Square. Yeah, like I said, lost a tapestry. Now, I'll carry on. Carry on, Miller. Love it. Right, now, to people who have never partaken in a long distance walk before, that comment may appear to be neither here nor there. But to all those walkers who may very well be lifelong members of the Serious Hiking Association, that comment will be very telling. You see, when you approach an undertaking of the like I was on, you begin the long distance walk without any urgency whatsoever, but after you cross the halfway point in your journey, an urgency begins to slowly develop in you as you see your goal and the finish line becoming closer and closer. The urgency then builds into a slight crescendo as the fulfillment of your ambition is seen to be within your reach. Your pace increases as your excitement intensifies. In short, the closer you get to the end of your journey, the faster you want to walk, because you just can't wait to experience the feeling of joy as you complete your challenge and feel the grand sense of accomplishment when doing so. And so, during the last stages of a really long hike, you You're generally buzzing towards the end and can't wait to finish, for all the right reasons. On this day, I was feeling completely different though, and so removed from anything I'd ever experienced before. I simply didn't want my pilgrimage to finish, and I didn't want it to come to an end. I just wanted to go as slow as I could, and appreciate every last moment of the journey I was on. I wondered if the issues I'd had with my unmentionables through the whole journey were not just to challenge or test me, but were also to teach me to slow down. It became apparent to me that, as a consequence of the problems I'd had, I spent most of my journey plodding along out of sheer necessity and because of the pain. The extreme heat had played its part too, and even the extreme rain slowed me down some more. It had all resulted with the increasing of length of my experience and the depth of the experience I had. In fact, I'm usually the type of character who gets stuck in and lays into something, achieving results pretty efficiently and usually very effectively. Bang, 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 job done is one of my expressions I like to use, along with bang, 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 job done is one of the expressions I like to use, along with why do something tomorrow when you can do it today? Living like that had always made a lot of sense to me because I felt, in some circumstances, it made the most of the moment. But maybe there were other ways in which a moment could be best utilised, and perhaps that was one of the lessons I needed to learn from my pilgrimage. As I continued to walk, I remembered the wise words an old Cockney once said to me while we were finishing a gardening job in East Ham, and I was frantically trying to get the task finished by the end of the working day. Slow down, Lee. Save some for tomorrow, Roy told me. He was one of the old boys who used to work for Newham Council before the local parks contract went out to tender and his contract was forcibly transferred to a private company. And I loved the sentiment. In that moment, and as I traversed the last few miles of my pilgrimage to Canterbury, it was exactly how I felt. I needed to find an appropriate spot in which to camp pretty soon, and in the sentiments of Roy, I felt like I needed to save some of my pilgrimage for tomorrow. I carried on, and almost immediately after leaving the outskirts of Charlton, I was in a beautiful woodland and then came to a field surrounded by the same woods that appeared to be part of an old orchard. I wondered if this would play host to my camp for the night, but because of the high tree canopy around, the whole of the field was already out of direct sunlight, and I really wanted to find a place where I could see the sunset. Even though I had no idea about the terrain I was going to encounter ahead of me, I thought that it would be great to find a spot on a hill that might be overlooking Canterbury Cathedral itself. How wonderful would that be? I did realise, however, that I would be very lucky if I did find such a place. I also realised that it was rapidly reaching the point where I would be a beggar rather than a chooser in my quest for a perfect spot. But seeing as I had been pretty lucky thus far on my pilgrimage, I decided it was worth holding out for a bit longer before I finally settled on my camp spot for the night. About halfway into the field, I came across a sign which explained that I was in No Man's Orchard. I read the signage, and apparently the name No Man's was given to the land that straddled more than one parish, and so it was literally the land of no one man. The border of the villages of Charlton and Harbledown went straight through the middle of the orchard, and the two parish councils had bought the land in order to protect the traditional orchard and turn it into a nature reserve. It was very beautiful there, with its encouraged wildflowers. I half thought about camping there again, but decided to press on and left the orchard to re-enter the woods of Biggery Hill. The North Downs Way path continued through some picturesque and well-managed woodland, and I came across a trio of men working in the woods. An area of woodland had been coppiced with the timber stacked, and there was a fire on the go too. I thought it must be quite late for them to still be working, but it was a very pleasant sight to witness. Even though they were using chainsaws and were wearing modern clothes, They were part of a continuum that had been taking place for generations, and it was nice to behold such a traditional working scene. I felt pleased that such activities were still being continued and that the woodland was being managed in a time-honoured fashion. I eventually departed the extremely pleasant woodland path and came out upon a road. Just across the road was a gate leading to another large field, and I jumped across to investigate the possibility of making camp there. The field had dividing sections of hedge within it, and it looked to me as if it had been used as a car parking area at some point, but the lay of the land was not conducive to a good night's sleep, and every region of the field being lumpy and bumpy under the long grass throughout. Bugger, I thought, and I continued on by leaving the field and rejoining the North Downs Way on the road. Almost immediately the road became a flyover which crossed the busy A2. As I reached the middle of the road bridge, and so the middle of the A2 dual carriageway beneath me, I stopped to take in the view. The realisation of being so close to the end of my journey was really hitting home, and I found the sudden encounter with an overwhelming aspect of modern civilization difficult to take in, especially because it came so soon after my beautiful walk through the woods at Biggery Hill. I felt so removed from modern civilization during the moments that I just spent there. My final destination was not far away at all, and just as I completed my crossing of the road bridge, the North Downs Way was signed up again. This time it had a mileage distance incorporated on it and stated that Canterbury was just 2 miles away. I actually felt disheartened in that moment, as I realised that the distance it indicated was to the centre of the city, which meant I probably only had 1 mile of countryside left to traverse. Was I going to find a good spot to camp before I reached the outskirts? It wasn't looking good, and the section of the path I was now on was very similar to that of the area around South Derwent, and when I was leaving the outskirts of Dartford, with a very unkempt feel about it. I continued on and warmed myself with the thought that you never know in the regards to the possibility of finding a nice home for the night, but I had the feeling that my dream camp on a hill overlooking the city of Canterbury was in the realms of the greatest kind of wishful thinking. As the path began to go uphill, however, I started to feel hopeful again. Along the left-hand side of the path there was another orchard, and I managed to find a gap in the fence so that I could enter and conduct a little recce. I discovered that it was a bit exposed, with houses overlooking from the hill on the far side of the field, but decided that it may do if I was really desperate. I found a spot which was still being bathed by the sun and took up my backpack in order to take a well-deserved rest. I sat there for a while, considering the possibility of setting up camp, but concluded that I wouldn't be comfortable there, and so resolved to continue in my search. I decided to leave my backpack where it was while I did so, as it was becoming a great effort to keep walking around and searching with it on. It was safe enough where it was, and so considerably lightened, I found my way out of the orchard and continued up the hill while exploring every nook and cranny of camping opportunity en route. And literally within 5 minutes, and just as I reached the top of the hill, I hit the jackpot. As I took a small path to my left once more, I discovered a wide open field with a park bench in the middle of it, which was open to the public. It held fantastic views over the orchard I was just in and onto the Kentish hills in the distance. It was facing due west, and so I was standing in the full glare of a beautiful and mystically setting sun. It was perfect, top drawer. Could it have been any better? Not a chance in hell, or heaven for that matter, because although I previously had an inkling that it'd be nice to be looking from a hilltop and onto Canterbury Cathedral itself, I was glad that I wouldn't actually be seeing it that night now. I felt like the first sighting I should have of Canterbury should be on the morning of my arrival, and as it was now looking, that would certainly be the case. Thank you, God, or consciousness, whatever you call yourself. Thank you. Thanks for all your help. I said as I stood there, gazing upon the setting sun. With an air of excitement, I ran back down the hill, jumped through the fence, found and grabbed my backpack, and then returned at a pace to the bench at the top of the hill. I then relieved myself of my heavy burden and sat to enjoy the last rays of direct sunlight as they disappeared for another day behind the deep green hills of the Kentish landscape. See you tomorrow, mate, I thought as the sun slipped beneath the horizon and a slight chill entered the air. There was still another hour's worth of daylight remaining, so I didn't want to set up camp just yet because of it being a public place. There were houses surrounding the park area, and I also saw a number of beer cans and cigarette butts around the bench on which I was sitting. It was clear that this was a well-used place, and I thought that it was probably a place where youngsters may come to hang around or chill out at. Instead, I just did another recce of the area and found a spot to camp that I thought would be comfortable and quite well hidden. Once I had done that, I returned to the bench, got out my burner and began to prepare my dinner. It was past 10 o'clock and I was finally comfortable enough to pitch my tent and implement the remaining parts of my evening routine, just as the stars were forming in the celestial sky. I noticed that it was remarkably darker on this night, and after I'd finished my shower and was dressed in my sleeping wear, I sat in my tent and attempted to locate the moon. The night sky was clear, and so the moon couldn't have been hiding behind any indiscriminate cloud. I couldn't see it anywhere, and so I wondered if it had even risen yet. I gave up trying to locate the moon, as it was just so beautiful looking at the stars anyway, and because there was no apparent moonlight, there appeared to be more stars out than usual. As I sat relaxing in my tent, enjoying the last moments of the peaceful evening ambience and gazing upon the universe above me, I thought about the moon, and I remembered the time in 1999 when I went to Cornwall to view the eclipse. Asterisks. While writing this account, I discovered that there was a new moon on the 1st of July. It's full moon last night. Interesting. I was actually at Pinchuan Sands, as it was directly under the centre of line of totality and was positioned in a farmer's field on the cliffs overlooking Jessie Bay. I recalled the very strange and curious experience that I had that day during the minutes of the total eclipse. The sudden drop in temperature, the twilight accompanied by an eerie silence, the farm animals huddling together in the middle of the fields which occupied the hillsides on the landscape around me, the ship that was anchored out in the bay, and the flashes of light emanating from all of the coastline as people took their photos in order to record the special moment. But most of all, I recollected the thought that I had as I peered through my protective glasses and caught glimpses of the coming together of the moon and the sun through the thick cloud cover. What were the odds that the moon is so perfectly positioned from the earth that it covers the sun so exactly? It's amazing, I thought. To be honest, hours after the event, and when I really consider it, I thought that it was much more than amazing. In fact, I thought it was quite bizarre. But I didn't come up with a logical explanation why it should be the case. The odds seemed too long for something like that to have happened by chance, and the only conclusion I could come up with was that whoever created the universe created it perfectly. Or whoever created the world created it perfectly. Whatever way you look at it. It wasn't a great explanation, but it's the best I could come up with at the time. I then went on to remember a time when I finally got some kind of answer with regards to that question. It was exactly 9 years later, and during the August of 2008. I was feeling very down at the time, and I have to say quite depressed, because I didn't know what to do as I witnessed all the nonsense that surrounded me in the world. All I wanted to do was walk, such was my apathetic state of my mind, and so for much of that month I just found myself walking around and around and around Greenwich Park. Now, if you know Greenwich Park, then you'll know how big it is, and a circuit of the park is about 3 miles long. Some days during that period I'd walk around the park 6 or 7 times, and on many occasions I'll still be walking along into the night and long after the park had closed. It was actually very peaceful during those moments. It obviously wasn't a great period for me to experience, as I felt very low most of the time. But one day, as I was walking towards the park after exiting the Greenwich Foot Tunnel, I had an urge to go into Waterstone's bookshop en route. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, and so I just thought I'd just douse for some information. In brackets, if you're not familiar with that expression or act, it simply means that I went into the bookshop, walked around randomly, and picked up a book that I felt attracted to, and without looking at its title, I then just opened it and started to read the page before me. I found that throughout my life, it is such an efficient and effective way of gaining the information which is relevant to my path, and it seems to work for me almost every time. And that's something you can believe or disbelieve. I can't care less. It's just the truth of my experience. And I started doing that when I was 15, when I was going to Barking Central Library. I'd read all about the English history and world history, and just chanced my arm, just picked up, and then every single day, well, every time I picked up a book, a few days later, that piece of information come in handy. Honestly, then I started to work something else out. Anyway, I'll get excited a bit. Should put that in the book, shouldn't I? And so, I walked around Waterstones, went upstairs, walked towards the first floor window, picked out a random book on a random shelf, and then sat down to read. And the book was Who Built the Moon? By Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. It was a fascinating book, and I sat there for over an hour flicking through it and reading passages. I really wish I could go further into what I read, but that would be falsifying the account of the thoughts I had in that moment, and that I sat there observing the stars. The truth is, I only had the passing memory of the eclipse experience. Then I remembered my experience 9 years later in the book. Then I just thought, is the moon real anyway? Before I immediately remembered another event connected to the moon from my childhood. I was 12 years old, and I was out in my other nan's back garden in Dagenham. It was a clear night, and there was a full moon, and I had borrowed a pair of my uncle's binoculars so that I could see the moon's surface. I was fascinated by the moon when I was a kid, and this was the first time I'd ever had a chance of seeing its craters up closely. I'd been out there for almost an hour when my nan suddenly appeared in the garden and spoke with me. "Don't look at the moon for too long, Lee, or you'll go mad," she said. I still remember that moment to this day, because it was one of the strangest things I'd ever heard at the time. I gave my nan the weirdest of looks, and she went on to explain that one of her cousins used to look at the moon all of the time, and he went mad. Well, that conclusively proved it then. I wondered if my nan was just telling me one of those silly things that adults sometimes say to kids, just to scare them. But my nan said it with such seriousness that I really didn't know what to believe. However, from that day to this, I never looked at the moon for long periods of time again. And as I sat there looking at the heavens, I thought, maybe it's a good job I can't see the moon tonight after all. After that,